Spark Partners, Adam Hartung and Manny Turan, business growth experts, teaching you how to understand your customers and harness the power of trends. Present the Business Trendsetter Podcast.
Welcome to the Business Trendsetter Podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We're here every week to discuss all things trends, as well as some other things that I'm going to discuss today. You know, the climate that we're in today in business is ever-changing. There's a lot of political winds at play. And, you know, as Spark Partners, we really try to stay the course with all these changes. And we get a lot of questions regarding some of these disruptions that are happening. And, of course, some of the body of your work, Adam, had to do with disruptions and how companies react to disruptions, as well as on the other side of that, trends. And I want to start talking about that. You know, how can a small or medium-sized business owner deal with these ever-shifting winds of change under the umbrella of disruption, whether they want to or not?
Well, thanks for bringing it up, Manny. And I think it is important to understand that what we've been able to talk about with our podcasts for several years now has been mostly dealing with there's a way things are operating and what are trends telling us about the direction of the future. What I think we're seeing happen in the last 60 days, well, not what I think, what I know we're seeing happen is that you have leadership that's saying, I intend to change the way we do business in America. He's very clearly saying, I intend to change the way we do business. And he said, I'm going to change the foreign policy. I'm going to change domestic policy, and I'm going to change the way we do things. And then we've had this new thing created called DOGE, the DOGE office, and it's got a person running it who said, my sole intent is destroy government, to destroy the intent of government. Okay. What that now means is that if you're a leader in a small and mid-sized business, it's sort of like, WTF?
Yeah, things are
Really?
changing for sure.
Yeah, what am I supposed to do? I mean, I'm not Exxon out there. I mean, I don't have money to play the game. You know, I hear that there are deals being cut around, what if you put money in certain places that you get benefits in other places. I don't play that game. I'm a small to mid-sized business leader, right? And maybe I can do a little bit with my local congressman or my governor, but things are pretty limited. So I don't play that politics game. I don't play it at all. And now all of a sudden it sounds like I'm somehow supposed to be part of that politics game. And what I want to do is come back and say, actually, we have the underpinnings for you. The work we've been doing does give you insight as to what you can do next. And
Yeah.
it feels like the moorings are gone, but I think there are still moorings there to hold on to.
Yeah, so let's break it down. So imagine a small or medium-sized business owner or leader a year ago. Things were the way they were. Things were changing. AI was coming up. The gig economy was in full effect. You know, all these trends that we're talking about were at play and ever growing, ever adjusting and all that. Then we had the election, which in itself is a bit of a disruption to our daily lives, our business. But now we're here, about a month and a half from the inauguration. And now all these changes are happening here. So how can they deal with change?
Yeah, so remember the book that I wrote, and it was pretty successful, put out by Financial Times, Create Marketplace Disruption, How to Stay Ahead of the Competition. But the name of it was Create Marketplace Disruption. So if we take a look and we go back at what went into the first 1,300 cases, we were looking at disruptions, where they came from. So there's a sort of an analytical approach to this, and I'm try to kind of stay away from the academic part of it and use more congenial language that people can understand. And to get there, let's go down just some simple roads. Like, for example, one of the phrases that we've heard a lot prior to the election, during the election, now post-election, is drain the swamp, right? I mean, that's something we hear a lot.
Drain
Don't
the
you agree,
swamp.
Manny?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then and this is a genuine question to you, Manny. We've never really talked about this before. What's the swamp? What are they trying to drain? What is the swamp and what are they trying to drain?
I mean, what the popular definition of the quote unquote swamp is the big government, bureaucracy, Congress and the Senate, multiple terms that it's a status quo mentality, right? The idea of getting rid of the status quo mentality.
Okay. So even you've just off the top of your head, it's not a simple thing to try to define. And where you got to in less than a minute was that there's issues related to Congress, that there's issues related to regulations that affects judges, and that it affects elected politicians as well as the regulators and all branches of government. So all of a sudden we've gotten to a very, very big question, right? In less just a few seconds, we got to, oh, it's this huge, massive thing of government that somehow I want to change. And so I want you to back up from that, because in reality, if we study this, in fact, when I wrote my book and published it in 2007, I talked about the swamp. And the swamp was a very big part of what I discussed in terms of how you operate a good business. So what happens anytime we have so think of the world. The world's not headed towards doing great, wonderful things ever. The first law, the second law of thermodynamics is entropy, which is that all matter is trying to find chaos. Yeah. That, if you set a pop can on a table, it's not trying to find something good to do. It's just waiting for some kind of thing to happen so it can fall over and spill pop all over the table. Matter is headed towards entropy, or is matter headed towards chaos. And so what we've done in business, if we think about it for a long time, and in fact, what we've done a lot of academia is, how do you take something and keep it from headed towards chaos and get it headed towards something successful? So for example, if you're in the world of geology and petroleum engineering, it's how do I pull stuff out of the ground that I can convert into a form of energy that Manny can use, whether he puts it in his car or he's using it in his house, or he's heating, or whatever. There's energy, there's things in the ground. If I get those things out of the ground and do a conversion process, I can eventually turn them into something usable. That's a usable process, right? So what we did in business was we started saying, how do I not only physically do that stuff, but how do I do it in a world where we make sure the resources are allocated to the most valuable stuff? And so what we get into, so if you go back 50 years, not that long ago, man, I mean, just when I was a kid, you go back 50 years, you had Mao Zedong in China, and you had Brezhnev in Soviet Union. And in those places, they didn't have a free market system. Some guy running the government had a bunch of people reporting to him, and somebody would say, make 15,000 cars, and we're going to price those cars at $150 a piece. That was a decision that somebody made.
Right. The market didn't decide. The central government decided.
Everything. Got to go back to this. And for more than half the population of the world, it was all decided by somebody else, right? It was that we called socialism, we call it communism. There's other names for it, but it wasn't a free market system, which is what we talk about in the United States, right? So our free market system set about saying, well, wait a minute, maybe we should decide how to fund those resources by letting the buyer or the consumer participate. Well, now the consumer is going to come in and figure out, do I want coal or do I want oil? Like, all these decisions are going to somehow rack their way to the consumer, and we're going to feed that information back in some kind of an info loop so that people can start saying, oh, I should build refineries, or I should put in coal mines, right? So I'm going to go create this business that's going to be effective. And what we did was we said, well, if I do all these steps right, I get an effective business. So I put resources in, and when I get done, I got more. In terms of, I put the resources in, all the resources cost me 90, but when I sold it, I got 100, and that's business. I came out ahead because I got more than it cost me to do what I set out to do in the first place, right? Now what happens is the better we do our business, the happier we are. And that's what we call best practices. And we'd say, oh, look, if I do this one step over and over and over and over again, and if I can get more and more efficient with it every time I do it, so that every 1,000 times I do it, I'm a little bit better than I was before. Now what's happening is I'm creating a very efficient system. So I'm doing the opposite of entropy. I'm doing this wonderful thing of making all of the matter do something good, so that the good outcomes get better and better and better. And so that was what we were doing in business. And we called them often success formulas. What's your success formula? Oh, my success formula is I get this and I put this with it, and I get an outcome that's over here. And so we had these success formulas. But what we learned, and this is what happened when we really studied. Yeah. When you studied it, you got into it, we started to realize that process of putting everything together and getting it all automated and make it work was very, very good until something happened in the world, right? And then, so for example, you have great, Kodak's making cameras and they're making film, and it's very inexpensive and it's popular and everybody uses it. And so it's like a great, wonderful world until digital photography comes along.
Right.
And in digital photography, it's a new process. You don't use film. All these other things happen. When all of a sudden I don't need that old process. And so what happened was the value of what you did went down and the new thing happened. Well, once that group of resources doing something that doesn't look like it's creating value, that's when we called it the swamp. It becomes the swamp. So now if you're working at, say you're working for Hostess, the company that had Hostess Hostess brands was
Twinkies and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the bread, the 12 help your body grow in 12 ways, 12 vitamins. Because okay, you got the Hostess Baking Company, right? Then you're there, and everything looks wonderful, but it starts to become this swamp because like, wait, I can't get this to go somewhere new. I'm stuck making Twinkies when I know people want something else, and I got to convert the old to the new. And now we're stuck in the swamp. So long before this election came up, this was known. This go back into the 70s and 80s. You read people saying we're stuck in the swamp. And that swamp was whenever we had all these resources together, we applied all these best practices, but the net of it was that we weren't getting the output we wanted. And that's when we learned that what you had to do to get the organization to change was implement a disruption. So we started realizing lacking a disruption, the old organization would disappear and the new one would come along and replace it, right?
Yeah.
You'd see literally Apple come along with, mobile devices and people quit using PCs, right? One would simply do away with the other one. And so what was happening was with lacking disruption, you get stuck in the swamp and eventually the swamp just dies out and it's got no effect and it's not producing anything and it just smells bad and nobody goes there and it goes away, right? Well, we said, okay, what do I want to do whenever I'm stuck in this bad place? Disrupt it. That's where we got disruption in business. And the idea was to disrupt it, you wanted to figure out what's the thing that we're doing wrong that we want to do better. Mm-hmm. What is the thing that we need to kill off? And so you could sit there and you could figure out, these are my success formulas. And you start saying, well, what I've got here is I've got a link or I've got a tie to something. And if I disrupt that thing, then I will affect the marketplace and it'll be better. So let me give you an example of something that happened in the federal government that worked extraordinarily well.
Okay. This recently or in the past?
This is in the past, but not that far in the past. That's the key. So Jimmy Carter had started down the road of deregulation. He deregulated the airlines. He deregulated trucking. He started deregulation, which became a big deal and was very successful under the Reagan administration, which followed. But Reagan comes into business, and not unlike Trump, President Reagan was sitting there saying, I want to have a more effective government. Then, he's the one who said the worst thing you can hear is, I'm here to help you. I'm from the government, right? Sort of an anti-government binge as well. And he said, what could I do? And what he did is he looked around and he said, one of the biggest problems we have right here in the federal government is the way that the federal government unions work is we feel like our hands are tied. We can't do anything about it. We've got people in jobs. We don't need those jobs anymore. We really aren't getting use of our employees the way we should. And so what he said was, if we could untie the unions that have a stranglehold on the federal government, I think that what happens is we could get a more effective federal government. And so what he did was really simple and straightforward. He said to the air traffic controllers had a union. Air traffic controllers, not that many people, not a huge group of people, not tens of thousands of people, fairly small group of people. He said, I am not going to give you what you want in your collective bargaining agreement. And so this is now 1980, I believe it was, 81, 82, right in there. And he said, look, I'm just not going to negotiate with you on this. Here's what you're going to get. If you want to be an air traffic controller, here's your package. They came back and said, look, this is a tough job. It's very strenuous, stressful. People get killed if we don't do our job right. And you can't afford, as president, for us to go on strike. And he said, well, F you. And he let them go on strike. And they went on strike for about 22 days and they gave up. And they realized, okay, we're not going to be able to get what we want. The business people were clamoring for them to get back to work. In fact, they were losing the war and the bigger war, and that from a top level perspective, people were more saying, go back to work. You've got a good job. It pays well. Why are you asking for more money?
Yeah.
The media side of it went towards, we don't really support the union. We don't support the workers. So guys, just, come on, take the contract and go back to work. That disrupted a lot. When he did that, he disrupted the air train, the planes. So that disrupted transportation and shipping of things. People are shipping the blood on airplanes, and all of a sudden you got problems. People can't get back and forth. And remember, this is back in 1980. We're not talking FaceTime, or hey, you don't have Zoom.
You got to be in person.
This is really pre-internet stuff, right? And so now, and it really affected people's work. So it was a big, big disruption, but it was very targeted. Now what happened is the union, they agree, they take the contract. And now what happens is, as a leader of the government, Reagan and his team went around and said, look, this is what you're going to do. We're going to do this in a new world order, and here are the new contracts. And what they did was they effectively made a big difference in how we thought about unions. And union participation started to drop dramatically. And from about 40% of workers in the United States in large organizations working in a union when Reagan became president, 45, it drops down to, I think it's like 8% now, right? And unions are nowhere near, Reagan hasn't been in office for, 35 years. And yet what do we have? We have people still talking about, I hate unions. And that all goes back to that disruption. What I want to point out is very different than what DOGE has done. What we have here is just like, I'm going to go shut down USAID. Okay, let's go and look at that.
Okay.
Now, why? Why are you shutting down USAID? What is the big thing that you're trying to attack? What's the swamp you're saying you want to attack?
I think the swamp that they're trying to attack or drain is the idea of giving billions and billions to other countries when they say we need the money and the resources here in the States. I think that's the foundation of it. I'm sure there's other features to it, but that's generally what they're trying to accomplish from what I understand.
All right. So we want to keep money in the U.S. to, help people with drugs, right? Or those types of domestic problems, rather than having money made available offshore for problems in countries that most people don't care about, right? The vast majority of people aren't caring about what's happening in Mali and the Congo and places like that. And it's like, that's their problem, not my problem. Right? At the top of it, who's going to argue with that? Right? You can't really argue with that. But if we compare that with what happened during the Reagan administration, you start saying, wait a minute, when the airline controllers, when the air traffic controllers couldn't work, it affected everyone in the United States. They sat back and said, whoa, what's going on here? Why are we doing this? So it was a big deal to everyone. They all had to pay attention to it. In this case, most people were like, what do I care? For most people, it's sort of like you're playing tiddlywinks with the government. Get real. It's not serious. It's not a big deal. So right off, they didn't pick something to disrupt that mattered to most people. Then the second thing they did was when they did the disruption, they didn't say why. They didn't say, okay, if we can shut this down, then what's going to happen is immediately there will be an increase of 400% in the money made available to the largest 40 cities in the United States for getting homeless people off the streets. Oh, see, that would have done, here's what I'm doing and here's the outcome. Instead, I'm just going to destroy this. And you get messages going out on the most social media. I spent the weekend throwing USAID into the wood chipper. But there's nothing there saying, well, so why should I care? What am I going to get out of it? What's the benefit of it? And as a result, you didn't have this, what's it from and what I want to go to, right? So what's happened is now we've created disorder, right? But we've created disorder without any sense of where we're going to recreate order. So the second law of thermodynamics is entropy. Things want to go fly apart in pieces. Now we're back to that same thing. You've now disrupted the government. You're throwing it into pieces, but tell me how you're going to put it back together.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me be good about it. So what I want to point out here is that the disruptions that have happened so far in this process, universally and consistently, are not a good disruption. We know what a good disruption is. We know it because since that happened with Reagan, and since I've been doing this for 25 years, I'll go in and say to somebody, look, this is the state of your business. Then one of the big examples was I worked for many organizations that were in education. And when it became possible that you could sit at home and do your degree work online, the institutions that were tied to buildings, which were very expensive, and professors where you had to get everybody together and go to a class, the traditional model is much more expensive than the online model. And so the traditional guys were really getting crashed. And so what I had to do was go in there and say, wait a minute, your traditional model is just too expensive. You're crashing. It's going to burn if you don't attack this. You've got to attack the traditional approach. You've got to say, we want to do education. We want to help you become a nurse. We want to help you become a business person. We want to help you become a technician or a geologist, whatever you want to do. And we can do this in a way where you can do it part or all of it from home, right? And it'll be less costly, and you can move yourself forward. So here's what we attack, the traditional model. What are we going to do with that model? Put it into the online model that's going to help you go be more successful. Now what happens is we start saying, okay, that helps people along that trend. So the bigger trend that was happening in education, the bigger trend was I could get more education for less money online. What we did was we attacked that by attacking the notion of having the buildings. And we would do that frequently by coming in and very quickly saying, okay, if you want to stay in business, first thing we're going to do is we're going to sell those 2 buildings. The money to go build the online courses. And because we need to create a break, we need a disruption in the way people think about our university so that they start seeing that it does more than just have students on campus. We now have a hybrid model. We have these other models, right? So we have examples of where you implement disruptions to get the outcome you want, to lead you down the road to where you create a new thing by reducing investment and making less pleasant the old thing to put it into the new, right? Redirect your resources. That is not happening. We don't see anything like that happening right now.
It's one-sided.
Yeah, we call it chaos. If you go back again to the academic way of thinking about this, first and second laws of thermodynamics, what we've done is we've thrown things into a state of chaos. We've removed the order and thrown things into a state of chaos by saying, hey, we're going to do radical things at the border. We're going to put a whole bunch of people on airplanes and we're going to hand them to Venezuela. And on the way there, we're going to call up the head of Venezuela and tell them that we're bringing 2 planes loads of people and you better let them land. That, again, what was the disruption? What were we trying to change? What were you getting rid of? And what were you going to put in its place? There was no discussion of a plan. As a result, in the short term, what we see happening now is we start seeing people showing up at town halls and asking their representative, how does this help me? I mean, what are you going to do? We actually see farmers saying, wait a minute, I was opposed to illegal immigration, that's for sure. And I really questioned whether we needed to send all this money overseas. But what I'm looking at now is if you just shut down USAID, I'm out there making wheat, soybeans, corn, artichokes, whatever. And X% of my revenue comes from this USAID program, buying these crops and sending them overseas. If you take all that demand out of the marketplace and 10% of the demand goes away, and I live in this farmer's world where I'm living on razor thin margins, what's that going to do to price? Anybody think about that? And now people are going, crap, WTF? No, we didn't. The second order, you didn't think about where we're going. And what I'm going after is that in the middle of this, the people that are getting fired are people who do the second order stuff. They're the people who sit down and say, well, okay, if you make this law and you make this regulatory change, these are the implications. They feed that back up and then they talk about how to change things, how to talk about to get where you want to go. In this case, what we're saying is on top of the fact that we're making loud pronouncements about killing things off, we're talking about just getting rid of all these people in the government. Well, now what happens is the small, medium business person that's sitting around saying, wait a minute, if you're going to get rid of all these people, I'm sorry, but what's going to happen in my marketplace? What's going to happen? People that monitor, for example, pollutants. There's a lot of pollutant that happen in manufacturing of my product. Just take somebody who makes printing products, for example, ink. There's a lot of pollution in the process of creating ink. And you say, okay, you create ink, there's pollution. Using the ink, there's pollution at the print, and then the ink, the leftovers when you clean a press and all that, there's pollution. There's ecological downsides to those things. There have been people that set up rules and regulations. If you send those people away, are you going to quit enforcing the rules? If you quit enforcing the rules, then I'm not going to be competitive if I try to live by the rules, because the guys who quit using the rules will do far better than I am. What would be called cheating or illegal, that you're going to deal with it. So what's going to happen? What's the second order benefit? So anyway, what we're trying to get to is that this is not something that's that's never been thought of before. We've talked about disruptions in government. We've talked about how to do them effectively, and we've talked about doing them ineffectively. We've seen it happen in our country, like I talked about with the Reagan example, and other countries. But now, what do I want to tell the small business person today?
Yeah, what do they do with this when there's disruptions, right?
Look at the second order implications, because what we know is they always win. In the short term, when you have chaos and the order flies around, what happens is everybody else is looking around saying, well, how do I take that chaos and put some order to it when I got a chance? So what you have is, take, for example, in the case of U.S. aid, you have China and Soviet Union, China and Russia and other countries are saying, oh, if the U.S. is going to pull all of the money out of Somalia that was used for food, we can now come in, we'll take over the distribution system that they operated, and we will feed it, we'll buy the crops from South America. We'll go get them in Argentina, Chile, places like that. So we'll leave the U.S. farmers not getting their money. We'll get the Argentinians, will get the money, and we'll get the crops. We'll go and we'll deliver it in Somalia. And the people in Somalia will say, oh, I love Russia. I love China. I'd like to go be there. And now what happens, you say, in the short term, doesn't look like it makes any difference. But what I'm pointing out is that the demographics will win. The long-term things we've talked about, the drive trends, will end up forcing a new order. And the new order will come back in, and they will replace what was the old order. Now, again, what we historically talked about is how old orders are going away because new orders are much more efficient, right? Mm-hmm. So technology like AI happens, makes it much more efficient. That's the change that's coming. What you have to look at now is saying, not just is it more efficient, but say, if that order goes away, what will be the replacement order? And now as a business person, you have to start thinking about what is that replacement order and what does that mean for me? Where is it that I want to take my business? This is not something a lot of business people do on a regular basis. We struggle, as you know, Manny, getting people to just talk about what are the big trends in their business today. You know, we struggle trying to talk to people that have auto repair shops or, anything related to cars like fuel stations and saying, look, if there's going to be more electric vehicles out there, what does it do to your business? So it's just at a first order level. Now what happens? Some of those people are saying, I'm saved. It sounds like the Trump administration is anti-EV. So now they're not going to go forward with the programs. Not going to go forward with putting those chargers out there. We got a relief. I'm sorry, folks. But yes, there will be some disruptions there. But in the last 2 years, a lot of money and energy was put in place trying to prepare for putting those stations out there. And so there's a lot of them that are going to happen just because it's like a tank, like an army tank. It's just going to keep rolling. And so you've got Musk trying to get in front of all these tanks saying, I can blow these all up. And unfortunately, no, it won't. He's not going to be able to blow them all up. And even if you stop one tank, there's always more tanks behind them, right? You got to realize that that's why we have laws that are run by the legislature. And that's why we have judges that operate according to laws. So DOGE, you can have the group say, look, we're going to stop the implementation of a lot of electronic charger stations. Then they're going to say, we're going to stop that. Well, what's going to happen is the people that have put billions of dollars into preparing to launch and put in place these stations are going to come back and say, wait a minute, we got a government contract that was signed by the previous administration, and it says we're going to go do it. Now the judge is going to look at it and say, well, yeah, they got a contract.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of political implications from all this.
Yeah.
Like what you and I talked about in the pre-meeting. Ultimately, Congress and the judges need there's a reason we have 3 branches of government, right?
Yeah. So again, but you don't wait. I want to make sure everybody understands, don't wait. Yes, there's no way Congress and the judicial branch can move as fast as the executive branch. Executive branch just use an executive order. That executive order might turn out to be illegal, but what we know is what I will tell you is don't worry as much about is it illegal as is it supporting a trend or is it opposed to a trend? Does it look like it's going to happen or does it look like it's not going to happen? If you hadn't had the CHIPS Act, if you hadn't had Biden create a program that said we're going to put 300,000 charging stations out there, would that have happened anyway? Just because demand was growing? Sure. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get to. If you had you're going to give people $10,000, some amount of money per car if they bought an EV. So now you say, I'm not going to give them that. Does that mean sales of EVs are going to disappear? We've been over this 1,000 times. I have the charts that show out the improvements in EVs, what's happening, make EVs just a popular vehicle. Cost of operation. There's a whole bunch of things about an EV that make it a very popular method of transportation as opposed to a traditional ICE car for many, many people. So that means that the EV market is still going to grow. Mm-hmm. Even if the subsidies, that's going to happen. You sit there and say, well, wait a minute, what about there's not going to be enough energy because Trump hates windmills, and because he hates windmills, we're not going to go do these programs. And the answer to that would be, he can scream and yell how much he hates windmills, but if the people putting the windmills in place continue down that path, and they've already invested, let's say $2 billion, now they're going to have to invest another $20 million in lawyers. Are they going to stop?
One of the many things I've learned from you, Adam, is the idea of you can't beat a trend.
You can't.
The market will move around, will wiggle around, but ultimately they'll fall in line with these emerging trends. AI, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. The gig economy, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. These energy initiatives, same thing. I mean, we're heading down that road, and no matter what the government does, it's eventually the market will decide.
And that's what I want small business people to take away from this. It is a big deal. I don't want to act like it's not a big deal. I mean, what's happening is a big deal. But let's go back. Those 6 business people we love, the ones that we look back and we start saying, man, that's the person I want to emulate. We're creators. Okay. Henry Ford created the assembly line and put cars in everybody's house, right? And so we look at that, and despite all of his flaws, we say he created the assembly line. He made a mass market. Eastman and Kodak created a mass market for photography. People are now taking, 150 selfies a day. Well, because way back when, there was some couple of guys that said, you don't want to have this giant box and everything it took for photography. And they created the idea of amateur photography. Now we have amateur photography in its new form. These things will happen. And even though you got somebody saying I'm anti-government, it's going to happen. And the easiest thing in the world is to say you're a slash and burn kind of person. I do this with clients all the time. I walk in and say, look, I can improve your profits 50%. I guarantee I can do it in one day. Why? Well, because I can just come in and sell all your assets. Now, you may not have a year 2. You may not survive year 2, but I can make year 1 look really fantastic. And all I got to do is slash and burn a bunch of stuff. That's all that Musk is doing. He's running around saying, I'm slashing and burning stuff. I'm kind of like, okay, that doesn't make you likable, right? It isn't why people admired you. You were admired because you created PayPal, which was part of the internet, which became a revolution. You've been admired because you drove the programs for EVs for a long time, and you made people realize there were benefits to having EVs over standard cars, and that was creating. You created the satellite system for the phone system that goes around the world. You created the boring company that's creating tunnels for, and it's the creation side. That's the people who take a matter and turn it into something productive are the ones we have great value for. The ones who create the first law of thermodynamics by transforming unusable or unused or poorly used assets into a very highly valued asset by putting order to those assets in a way that creates value. And so that's what we always want to say. We want to find people that create value. Musk will not go down in history being great for destroying value, but for culling programs, for shutting this AID. To the extent he's remembered it all, that will not make him great, right? What will be great are the people that look at this and say, wait a minute, this creates an opportunity.
Yeah,
right?
I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. I mean, love him or hate him, there's people that I know that have gone both directions. They didn't like him before, but now they like him, or vice versa. I think there's a tremendous piece of realization for consumers that, yeah, like you just said, he was a creator once. Now he's destroying, certain forms of government. I think ultimately the idea, like we started talking about, is good, of trying to make a more efficient government. But the end result, there's a lot of nuance that is not being looked at. I have friends that work for the government, or I have friends that are tied to grants. And the company that I run, I mean, fortunately, we're not totally tied to these grants. But there's a lot of nuances here that destroy tremendous amounts of momentum that they had. And it's under the idea of we're just going to slash and burn.
So, again, for me personally, my son got a PhD in bioengineering. Took him 8 years, did very well. Came out a number of very popular and important papers he wrote. Took over a lab, bring to fruition a lab in Boston. There was a joint venture between MIT and Harvard where he was on faculty and hooked up with Mass General. And it was had all this money coming in, and they were working on a whole lot of stuff related to medical imaging. Okay. The net of it was that 3 years ago, he said, Trump sucks and Trump's going to take over the world. And I said, what? This is 3 years ago. He said, yeah. I said, he said he was lucky he didn't get elected the first time, and I'm surveying the country, and I'm going around. He's like younger than me, obviously. He's my son. He's talking to a lot of people, and he's saying, you know what? This isn't going to cut it. And he literally sold everything he owned but his computer and moved to Germany 2 years ago, and he created a lab in Germany. And now people that used to be at the lab in Boston are walking away because they don't know if they're going to get paid anymore. These are people with 8-10 years of research experience in medical imaging, and they don't know if they're going to get money at the lab to turn the lights on, much less pay these people. And he's saying, well, I got a lab. You want to come over here and work in Antwerp? He's got like 8 labs setting up, and they're setting that up. And we saw this happen before. Back in the second Bush administration, they cut off all the funding that was related to anybody that used the fetal membranes. And what they said is, if you're doing that, you can't do this research in the United States. Boom. It took less than a year. All of it went to the UK and France, right? What I'm looking at is, folks, when this stuff happens, it changes, but it doesn't change the outline. Look at the second order impact. You may have to change your business. That meaning you may have to attack your value delivery system.
Right.
You may have to do it differently because customers are going to behave differently. But if you know your customers and you know what they want, you know their needs, as these things are happening, look and say, okay, if this happens to the government, what's going to happen to my customers? Where's the vacuum? Fill that vacuum. If you fill that vacuum, you're going to make a lot of money. It's going to work long term. Know your customers. Know their needs. Look at where their needs are being poorly met. Look where any setback by the government reduces something and says, oh man, now my pain's gone way up. Go after that pain threshold. Attack that with something new, and you're going to fill that gap, and you're going to do well. And now, I don't know, if you're currently doing business in Africa and the countries where USAID is important, then you got opportunities there today. I don't know how many of our small, medium-sized leaders are out there, but if you're out there crying about it, don't cry in your milk. Look at the opportunity to pick up the gold. Where's it going, right?
Exactly.
Where do we go to this? So I know this has been could feel like a tortuous story, and I love talking about it because I spent so much of my life in this whole going back and talking about order and chaos and how to get success out of chaos. And I'm hoping we can do more discussions like this and get more people involved. But and why do I say that? Because it relates to what happens today. Think of your business like you've got to create success. You put resources in and you sell those resources. You want to put resources together in a way that creates value. And that value comes because you get paid more than you put into it, right? And that's the goal of any business, is to create value out of that chaos. Right now, we have people not creating good disruptions, but rather creating chaos. As they create chaos, it means that the resources are being thrown into a chaotic state. Where's it going to go? Where's it going to end up? That's where you want to dive in and say, look, I can figure out how to reorganize these resources, and that becomes a big opportunity. And it will always drive to the same trend it was driving before the chaos was created. The demand out there on the trend didn't go away. All they did was attack the delivery system. The chaos came by attacking the delivery system and creating chaos in the delivery system. So redefine that value delivery system to go back after that second order trend, to go after what people want, and this is a big winner.
Yep, very well said, Adam. This is a good discussion, good conversation. Certainly there's a lot to unpack here, and a lot of people are feeling the pain, but there is a lot of gold there if you really look at the underlying trends. And thanks for the conversation, Adam.
Thanks a lot, Manny.
Cheers.